Good morning. And you're very warmly welcome to the Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee this morning, 2nd of December. This meeting is recorded and will be made available to view via the Council's website, except for discussions involving confidential or exempt items. Therefore, the images, audio of these individuals present and of speaking will be publicly available to all via the recording on the Council website at www.caerphilly.gov.uk. If members lose connection during the meeting, please make every attempt to reconnect. However, the meeting will continue as long as it remains correct. Item 1 is to receive apologies for absence. Can I ask our committee clerk this morning for apologies received?
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies for absence from Councillor Etheridge, Councillor Price and Councillor Williams. We've also got apologies from representatives of Mentor Iaith, SSAFA Gwent branch and the Parent Network. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In the absence of the Chair, I as Vice Chair I will be chairing the meeting today. I'm Councillor Liz Aldworth. I represent Bedfordshire, Thomas and Macon Ward of Caerphilly Council. I'm going to ask the committee clerk now to do a roll call for attendance. When called, can you turn your camera on and your microphone and indicate you were present? Thank you, members.
Thank you. Councillor Aldworth.
Present.
Councillor Bevan. Councillor Collis. Councillor Cook. Councillor Fussell. Councillor Goff.
Present. Sorry, present.
Councillor Stone. Councillor Haas.
Present.
Councillor Higgs.
Present.
Councillor Parry.
Present.
Councillor Stenner.
Present.
Councillor Whittle.
I'm here.
Representatives of Garvo, Stephen Tiley.
Present.
Alison Palmer.
Present. Can I give Gina Jones's apologies, please?
Yes, thank you. Representatives of the Compact Partners and Irene Bevan University Health Board. Gwent Police. The Office of the Gwent Police and Crime Commissioner. South Wales Fire and Rescue.
Present.
Caerphilly Business Forum. Town and Community Council's representative. Natural Resources Wales. And representatives of the voluntary sector. Abertudor Community Church. Barod Cymru. Blaenau Gwent and Caerphilly Care and Repair. Caerphilly and Blaenau Gwent Citizens Advice Bureau.
Present.
Cruising Gwent. Groundwork Wales. Home Start Cymru.
Order, present.
Yeah. Oakdale Community Centre.
Present.
Pobble Housing. Right from the Start. The United Reformed Church. The Youth Centre Kevin Henguide.
Present.
And Vanguard Caerphilly. Thank you.
Many thanks, Sharon, for that. The next item, item 2, is declarations of interest. Councillors and officers are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and or prejudicial interest in respect of any item of business on this agenda in accordance with the Local Government Act 2000, Council's Constitution and the Code of Conduct for both councillors and officers. Please, if you could indicate using the hands up function button to let us know if you have any such declarations. Councillor Higgs, please.
Thank you, Chair. What it is, section 4 it is, I believe, Community Empowerment Fund. There's a section in there regarding GAWA, and I'd have to declare an interest on it because I'm on the Executive Committee.
Right. Thank you very much, Councillor Higgs. Can that be noted?
Could someone remind me when it's coming up to that, and then I'll knock my system off here?
Sharon, are you able to indicate when Councillor Higgs has to leave the meeting, please?
Yes, Chair, and I've got that noted.
Thank you very much.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, both. Right. We're looking at item 3 now, which is to receive and consider the minutes of the Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee held on September the 23rd, 2021. So we're looking for the minutes for that meeting, and if they are in order, I'd like a mover and a seconder, please.
Very happy to move, Liz.
Thank you very much, Councillor Goff. And a seconder, please. I'll second the minutes, if that's okay. Thank you very much for that. We have to all agree that the minutes are in order. So I'm looking for agreement by using the hands up function, members. Thank you. Those present at the last meeting can indicate whether they approve the meetings. Right. Sharon, are you able to?
Yes, that's agreed by the majority, Chair.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, everyone. You can take your hands down now. Our next item is going to be presented to us by Nicola Fitzpatrick from Lamau. And it is entitled Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence, and the White Ribbon Campaign, which I think started on November the 25th this year. So Nicola, are you able to?
Madam Chair, with respect, are you going to take matters arising from the minutes? We just approved them as a true record, but I thought you were going to take matters arising.
Roger, yeah, thank you for interjecting. And are there any matters arising from the approved minutes, please?
Yeah, I did want to raise on page 2 whether we are to have an update on the Caerphilly Empowerment Fund.
Thank you. Mr. Cook, please.
We haven't got a report on that prepared, and we can bring one to the next meeting if you like. I know that we have had the deadline for the first round has been as passed. We had 22 applications for that, but any more update on that I can't give at this stage. But I'm happy to bring one to the next meeting if that's what the committee would like.
Could I thank Mr. Cook? He's partly answered my question, the number of applications received. Wonder if you've got any information about how much money has been dispersed.
I don't have that, to be honest, Roger, but I can certainly bring that to the next one. They've been initially assessed, but they haven't been approved yet, so we wouldn't have that figure even if we knew the total amount that had been applied for. But certainly for the next meeting I can provide that.
Thanks, I'm happy to accept that information, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Roger. Yes, so I'm handing over to Nicola Fitzpatrick, and welcome. And we've got somebody waiting in the lobby too, Sharon. Are we able to admit this person?
Chair, I believe that's the press waiting in the lobby. I am trying to admit them, but they don't seem to be able to join the meeting.
Okay.
I'll just ask one of my colleagues now to see if they can admit them to the meeting.
Right, so thank you very much. Nicola, may I bring you in now, please?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm hoping I'm about to share my screen. Can everybody see? I think it's loading, bear with. I don't know what's happening. I love technology. Right.
You got up for me on the screen.
Everybody can see?
Yes.
Great, okay. And can you only see the standing slide, or can you see all of the slides?
Sorry, it says landmine at the top left, and then imagine my word without domestic abuse.
Yeah, great, thank you. So thank you for the invite today. I'm here on behalf, my name's Nicola Fitzpatrick, and I am the Head of Service for Clymai's Domestic Abuse and Gender Specific Services. So I cover all of our provision in Gwent. That includes community and accommodation-based services for adults and children. But today I'm here representing the whole sector in Gwent, including the regional coordinator who couldn't be here today. So I'm presenting on behalf of the region, really. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of services. So the Vowdress V Act, which is the Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Act in Wales, is the first Vowdress V Act in the whole of Europe. So it's something that Wales can be really proud of. It came into effect in December 2015. So we're now, in our 6th year of working under the framework of the Act. And what that has done is really bring together a commitment and a drive from Welsh Government to Wales that we are working towards ending all forms of violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence. There was a lot of pushback at the start under the guise of the violence against women element, where a lot of lobbying and campaigning went on around whether male victims felt that they were included within the Act. So just to kind of give you an overview of that, violence against women is a very specific form of violence against women because they're women, and includes some of the lesser known elements of violence against women, including things like female genital mutilation that can only be done to women and girls. Domestic abuse and sexual violence incorporates absolutely everybody that could be a victim of either of them acts. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of context as to when we're talking about, I'm not sure how much of this you can see because it's very small on my screen. I'm just going to pull these up, bear with. So, and this linking into White Ribbon Campaign, so this is some of the data and the statistics that we work with, and kind of tells you a bit about that gendered nature of what we're talking about. So it's estimated that there's 3 million incidents of violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence in the UK every single year. The police nationally are called every 30 seconds to deal with an incident of domestic abuse within the home across the UK. So it's we're talking about, we're currently in a pandemic. Bear with me, I have a cat that likes to attend every meeting alongside me. So we talk about, we're living currently in a pandemic of coronavirus. However, when we talk about the volume of domestic abuse, sexual violence and violence against women across the UK, it's an endemic that we've been living with for years. I've been delivering this work for nearly 20 years. And sadly, this data, these statistics, a woman is murdered every 3 days in the UK through domestic abuse, and that statistic hasn't come down at all in the last 10 years. So all of the work and all of the campaigning and all of the provision that's in place, and we're still not seeing a reduction in murder. So on a Gwent picture, and the reason that, if you've seen anything to do with White Ribbon, we've been talking about the 30 challenge for Gwent, and I'll go on to some more details on that, is on average, the police are called out to houses that include 30 children every single day across Gwent when they're dealing with incidents of abuse. However, I would caveat that is the absolute tip of the iceberg. So last year, Clymai as an organisation, we worked with nearly 2,000 people across Gwent, and of them, 70% of them have had no interaction with the police whatsoever. So when we look at that 30 children per day in the home, that's around 30% on average of cases that we're actually dealing with. So that just kind of gives you a bit of a feel as to why we're doing the work and what that actually looks like operationally. There's a statistic there that 75% of victims are targeted in their workplace. So even work isn't a safe space. And at the moment, I'm sitting in my dining room, so we're working a lot from home, and therefore abuse and violence is more hidden because people aren't having them spaces to actually go out to and see. I'll share the slides afterwards with you all, so you can actually have a look at them yourselves. And if there's any queries or questions, you can just let me know. So in Gwent, and this is in line with the Act, so what we're doing here in Gwent is working under the key strategic priorities of the Act. So the first priority is increasing awareness and challenging attitudes. So it could be attending events such as this, it could be delivering training. We also have a communication and engagement group that's made up of representatives from the sector, Gwent Police, the PCC's office, and we look at what the thematic issues are that we're seeing across Gwent, and then we deliver campaigns and awareness raising in order to highlight the profile of that. So most recently, one of the biggest pieces of work we've done this year is around older people and abuse. So we've all seen as a sector an increase in older people being referred into services that may have lived with abuse for 30, 40, 50 years and are now reaching out, or maybe somebody's identified it. We've seen a lot of older people being abused by adult children and in need of support. So the dynamic there is very different because, you're being abused by your child. So you may be fearful of your child, but they're still your child and you love them. So you don't want them to get into trouble. However, you're fearful in your own home. So looking at the nuances of that. So what we've done is through National Safeguarding Week, we did a lot of training, awareness raising. We put on specific campaigns. We targeted places that such as GPs, pharmacies, supermarkets, with information and posters that were targeted to that audience. So that engagement and comms group runs 3 big campaigns a year, and we try and get messages out as far as we can. We put hand sanitizer with the national helpline number into COVID vaccination sites, so they were easily present in places that people were going to throughout a pandemic. So the second priority then, about increasing children and young people's awareness of abuse and healthy relationships. Welsh Government commissioned Have and Cymru to deliver the Spectrum programme, which is an educational programme delivered throughout schools and education provisions. And then as a whole, the sector also engages in that so I know I've got a team that go into community groups. They might go into youth settings. We've been into brownies and guides and young firefighters, young police cadets to do sessions around what is violence against women, what is domestic abuse, what is a healthy relationship, what might be the warning signs of an unhealthy relationship. We look at grooming and consent and exploring that to raise the profile, but also challenge attitudes and values that young people may have been brought up with, and make sure what we're trying to do is in their adulthood, they're going into healthy relationships and they're not at risk of being abusive. So we're trying to end that cycle. Priority 3 is around holding perpetrators to account and increasing opportunities for behaviour change. So in Gwent, we have 2 providers, Phoenix Domestic Abuse Services, that are based in Blaen y Gwent, and Bernardo's are doing some targeted perpetrator programmes. So that is for anybody that you can self-refer if you're concerned about your own behaviours, or you've identified that you are displaying abusive behaviours towards a partner or to a parent. There's male groups, female groups, young people groups, for anybody that has behaviours that would be deemed as abusive, looking at their behavioural change programmes. So they deliver across the whole of Gwent services for any perpetrator, and they're constantly involving, evaluating, looking at the dynamics of their programme and reaching out. So making early intervention and prevention a priority is a huge amount of work we're doing around learning from domestic homicide reviews. Sadly, through the pandemic, I think Gwent has the 2nd worst statistic of domestic homicide reviews across the UK. So it's a significant issue that we have here, and we are looking at mapping the lessons learned from that and what we need to do as a sector and as a region in order to make sure that we're not sitting around the table at more homicide reviews. Looking at how we are engaging with people before they meet that high risk criteria. And we're piloting in Gwent a new way of learning through homicide reviews. They could take 5 years. So a family is in limbo for 5 years waiting for the outcome of a review. And we've now put them in line with the adult safeguarding practice reviews. So they should be done a lot shorter. The families are fully involved in that, and a commitment to learning the lessons and improving services. There's a whole national training framework. So I don't know, and it's a question I've got at the end around Ask and Act training, valid arrest fee awareness training. It's accessible to all. So making sure that professionals are trained up to spot the warning signs and know where to signpost for support moving forward, right the way up to, for example, my team have to have a specialist accreditation. I have to have a specialist accreditation to be a manager of a service. So we're all making sure that we have the right skill set and we're effectively trained, but we're also training wider out to raise the profile of this. And then making sure that if you are a victim of any form of violence against women, domestic abuse or sexual violence, that there is support services available to you and that you can access them when you need them and you get the support that you need. So we're looking at mapping what provisions out there, where the gaps are, and how we can work together as a sector to make sure that we're bringing in the funding to meet the gaps across Gwent. So for White Ribbon Day, as I said, the police are called out to homes where there's 30 children every single day. That's monitored and tracked by Operation Encompass, if anybody's heard of that. So they have to log children within the home, and they have to let the school of them children know that they were called out to an abusive incident the night before. And the idea behind that is the school gives that child a bit of space. Maybe if that child hasn't done homework because they've been up all night because the police have been called to their home, that somebody checks in with them and checks that that child is okay and if there's any support needs for that family. Bearing in mind that's caveated by its school age children, so it starts at 4. So any call outs that the police go out to where children under 4 are in the home aren't registered on this system. So it's targeting the schools. But what we did on White Ribbon Day on the 25th was launch the 30 challenge. We have got a significant amount of schools and community groups and voluntary settings, all signing up to a different range of activities. Some of them are doing, primary schools are doing 30 star jumps. It could be read 30 books challenge. It could be make 30 cakes, whatever it is that anybody wants to do, as long as it's 30 of that same thing. And then we're sharing that imagery to raise the profile again through social media. The official White Ribbon campaign this year is called All Men Can. And what White Ribbon is about is trying to ensure that men step up to state that they don't commit or condone or will not be a bystander to any forms of violence against women and girls. And being male-led, you know, for men to call out other men, if you haven't seen it, I would recommend having a quick Google and watching the Police Scotland video that was called Don't Be That Guy. It had a huge amount of engagement, both positive and negative, because a lot of people felt that we were trying to say that all men are at risk of being abusive, and that's not the message at all. It's about all men can call out behaviours of other men. So if you see somebody saying something inappropriate, or if you see somebody behaving towards a woman that in a way that they shouldn't be, is to challenge that and not just be a bystander. And that's what that message is all about. So we've got local authorities involved, fire and rescue services, sports facilities that are involved. I think Newport Dragons are doing something. So a huge amount of engagement and a lot of youth groups standing up and pledging their commitment to not condoning violence against women and girls. Bear with me a second. So I was asked what can people do to engage with this whole sector, the whole White Ribbon campaign, but the White Ribbon campaign is the 25th of November and 16 days after. However, the police are still being called every 30 seconds to incidents of abuse. My team is still working with 2,000 people across Gwent every single year, and I'm one of a few organisations working across Gwent. So what we ask when we are engaging with other sectors and professionals is to consider, are your staff trained effectively? Would they know the warning signs? Do you have a workplace policy around violence against women and girls, domestic abuse and sexual violence? So in your workplace, if you had a colleague that was that you were concerned they may be in an abusive relationship, for example, what does your workplace support mechanism look like for that person? What we know is typically a victim of abuse will take on average 2 days a week off work, 2 days a month off work, either with injuries, low mood, depression, anxiety. They could be fearful to leave the house because of what's gone on. And that person tends to be disciplined within the workplace sickness policy procedure. So looking at how your procedures engage with each other, and if somebody was to be a victim of abuse, what you could do to support them and keep them in work. I'll give you an example that Asda is probably one of the best places I have come across for work-based support. They offered staff behind the scenes jobs. So we worked with somebody, for example, who was front of house working on tills, and they offered that person alternative roles that were maybe a bit safer within the building. They had security walk that person back and forth to their car at start and end of shift. They offered to change rotas, so there was no static rota pattern in place. And they offered support to take place during their working hours. So it was all done covertly in the workplace, in their safe space. And they do that as standard practice. And what happens then is that person, if they were concerned about somebody else, could say, do you know what, go and speak to HR, because this is the support that is available to you. So you create your own ambassadors and your own champions by practicing good procedures around supporting people in this. The National Training Framework and the Ask and Act training is open to all local authority staff, it's open to third sector organisations, it's all run via the Gwent Safeguarding website. So if you were to log on to Gwent Safeguarding website, there's a tab under there called Voucher SV, and all of the training that is delivered by the sector sits on that, so anybody is able to book on and attend that to build their own knowledge, awareness and understanding. And the local authorities as a whole have signed up for White Ribbon Accreditation, so it's looking at that whole package of support and what is it that you guys are doing as local authorities to be White Ribbon accredited. And that's something anyone can go through, that White Ribbon accreditation. We're working with schools to create White Ribbon ambassadors, so young people who can support other young people to get the support that they need by going to the safeguarding leads in the school, to challenge each other's behaviours, to promote discussion around violence against women and girls. And therefore, just creating that generational change is our hope. these are the service providers that you have across Gwent. What I will do is when I send through the presentation for you to distribute with minutes, I'll list in which local authority each of these providers work, just in case you ever should need them or to share the information. We work together as a sector. We all have different parts of Gwent that we work in, but collectively we come together on a monthly basis to make sure that we are all working together. That involves working with the PCC's office, Gwent Police and the Bowd Resby regional team. So that is a very whistle-stop tour of the state of the sector, if you like, in Gwent at the moment and what it is that we're working to achieve. And I'm open to any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Judy?
Yeah, very shocking to hear about elderly abuse. I mean, I was aware of that, where a person's offspring, often son, are abusive to an old person. But I wonder what support you can actually put in, because I understand there's a dire shortage of home care, and sometimes this abuse will happen because the elderly person needs quite a lot of care, and the caregiver, well, it's too much for them. I mean, they just can't cope with it all. And during the COVID lockdowns, I believe there was rather little help, external help going into homes, and families just had to cope. So I'm wondering what kind of support is in fact available for those sort of situations.
So there's two different dynamics there, Judith, that you've just highlighted. So one, we receive quite a lot of referrals for older couples where one of them has developed health or maybe a dementia sort of related issues, causing them to lash out at their partner, which is their carer. However, there's no domestic abuse dynamic there. It is based on what's going on in their world at that time, and the responsibility should be on social services to put in a really comprehensive care and support package, because you're absolutely right. To suddenly have to meet all of the care needs of somebody that you've lived with for all them years is really pressurising. And sometimes people can't cope with it, but that's from a supportive element. And we often guide the safeguarding team in what that needs to look like. But the dynamic of adult children abusing elderly parents is the increase that we're seeing. It's a really difficult dynamic for what I said earlier. You know, I've got children and I absolutely love my children to pieces. I wouldn't want them in trouble, but if one of them was abusing me, I would be frightened of them, but I still love them because they're my child. So to give you an example of that, we worked with an older lady that was in her late 80s, and her son moved back into her home with her after his marriage had broken down. And it was highlighted by the home help carers that were going in that she had bruising all down her legs, and they reached out for support for her. And in the initial discussion with our staff team, she disclosed that her son had alcohol issues, and when he was under the influence of alcohol, he targeted abusive behaviours towards her. So she was chairbound, so he was kicking her in the legs as he was walking past. He was locking her in her room. She was so fearful that at night time she took a pan up to her bedroom so she didn't have to come out into the corridor and go to the toilet. So she was really, really scared, and mainly over the weekend period, absolutely petrified of her son. However, she didn't want anything to be done about it because it was her son and she loved him and she felt he needed help. So the way in which we had to provide support there, and it kind of feels really against the grain as to what we said to do, was we supported the son to find his own accommodation in the community that was close to his mum, but he no longer resided with her and therefore no longer put her at risk, because that was as much as we could do to make sure that she was safe, was to support him to find that alternative accommodation. So we helped him find a private rental, but the outcome was her safety. So it's looking at how we do that in different ways in order to keep that person safe. But it is a really difficult dynamic. And you're right, a lot of providers stopped home visits during the pandemic, and that's, you know, it was something I put out on social media right at the start of the pandemic. I've never been so petrified, because all of a sudden what goes on behind closed doors was even more closed off, because people just became invisible through isolation, didn't they? So Simon?
Hi, I just wondered to what extent you see financial abuse linked to domestic abuse.
Pretty much in every case, I would suggest financial abuse is there. If you cut off the access to somebody's finances or financial freedom, how do they ever leave your abusive relationship? Because there's no way to do that. We have people that have a full-time job, but their wages go into somebody else's bank account and they have to request money. So on the surface, it looks like they should be having a decent income, but the reality is they have no access to it. It's a very effective way to continue to abuse without ever physically abusing or having to do anything, because you've restricted somebody's movements by cutting off their access to finances. We have a lot of people where they can do certain journeys, like take the kids to school, and when they come back, if they've done an extra 10 miles, they'll be questioned on where that 10 miles was. So it threads its way through most cases, but explicit financial abuse tends to happen more so under I can tell you an example of a male that we worked with whose ex-partner continued to take out small, after their relationship ended, absolutely ruined his life by taking out small loans in his name online. So you can do e-learning signatures. There seemed to be no credit checks or no verification checks if it was under a certain amount. And it only came to light when he went for a mortgage with his new partner and this raft of debt suddenly appeared on his credit check. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I guess my next question is, would you like to have a conversation at some point after this meeting?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where we could talk about maybe how we can work together on that particular area.
Yeah, so my email address should be on the invite list somewhere. So more than happy for you to make contact with me.
Great.
Okay. Councillor Goff?
Yeah, if I can. Nicola, can I just ask you a question? During your investigation of these complaints, do you tend to find that the home environment that somebody's grown up in impacts on it? I'll tell you, I was involved with a case several years ago where somebody was carrying out physical abuse to another person, and it turned out that he'd grown up in a home environment where that was norm, that every day the father inflicted physical abuse on the mother, and he saw that as normal. And is that commonplace?
It is. I would never want to accidentally go down the route of saying somebody's predisposed to it. So there's no evidence to suggest if you grow up in a violent household, you're going to go on to become abusive. If that was the case, overwhelmingly perpetrators of abuse would be females, because they tend to be, that's the dynamic that we see a lot more so of, is male physical violence from males to females is a lot higher. Female perpetrators of abuse tends to go down more so. I am generalizing quite a lot here, but tends to be a lot more manipulative, emotional. But that high level of physical violence, the dynamic tends to more so be males to females. I'm not saying there are violent females out there, but as women, we're a lot more manipulative in our abuse and in the way that's perpetrated. However, that understanding of what is a healthy relationship versus what is normal, like you say, young people that grow up with violence day in, day out, it can be that that's just their normal life, that's all they've ever seen. And what we do see sometimes there is they are more vulnerable to going into abusive relationships themselves, because it's what it's all they know. They don't know what healthy looks like, what a balanced, healthy, equal relationship looks like. They've only ever seen a power dynamic. So that's where we do a lot of work with young people about where our views come from, where our understanding of what an equal relationship looks like, where the dynamics come from, and where a huge amount of exploring with young people about where our attitudes and values come from, because it's not just within the family home, it's the environment we grow up in, it's our peer groups. So we do a lot of that, checking in with it and hoping, and the whole aim of working with young people on that is to get them to challenge each other's attitudes and values in order to make them healthy choices moving forward. But almost, so from a gendered view, the other part of my job is gender-specific services, so supporting supported accommodation for women, not under the umbrella of the domestic abuse services. And we recently did a spot check on there, and 100% of adult women living in them accommodations, and they're not living in them accommodations because of abuse, but 100% of them had grown up with abuse. So it is an interesting dynamic about how people's lives continue from a childhood that involved a lot of physical abuse. I went massively around the houses there, I know, yeah, nothing's a straightforward answer with me because there's always a dynamic somewhere in there, but I hope that kind of gives you a bit of an understanding there.
Okay, thanks.
Simon, your hand's still up. Did you have a further comment?
No, sorry.
Thank you very much. Well, Nicola, really has been such an interesting presentation, and you know, you have 20 years experience in this particular, you know, it's just unbelievable just how bad it is now, and thank you so much for enlightening us this morning. You know, the White Ribbon Day is very special, and I hope it grows, you know, in strength to highlight the difficulties every day that you were coming across.
Thank you. If anybody has any questions or would like to discuss anything further, feel free to contact me outside of this meeting.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you. So I shall leave your meeting and let you get on with the rest of your agenda now, but thank you so much for having me, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Our next agenda item is item 5, which is tree planting programme, and I'm handing over to our Mr. Paul Cook.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I've been asked to do an update on the tree planting programme, which the Green Spaces group within the Public Services Board has started to develop, and to give you an idea of how you can get involved. So I've got a little presentation, so you can look at some pictures rather than looking at me as we go through it. So if I can share that. Everybody see that okay? Yeah.
Yes.
So I won't tell you who I am, because hopefully everybody knows. But I suppose the reason for doing this, I manage the policy team, which covers lots of weird and wonderful things, as you know. But actually looking after the Public Services Board, and in particular sustainable development, falls under my remit. So I'm the one to deliver this presentation today. So, the image on the right, you'll hope you recognise, is the wellbeing plan, the current one, which is the Caerphilly we want. Which is the Public Services Board plan, and within that, one of the priorities is around protecting and enhancing the local natural environment. And there's a group which runs that as an action area called the Green Spaces Group, and that group has various strands of work, from sort of locally grown food to the climate change issues we're dealing with, but also flooding, and in particular, just recently, it started to address decarbonisation and carbon offsetting. So there's now a specific tree planting subgroup, which was set up about 6 months ago to look into this and see how we can take this forward as a partnership in the county borough. So on that group, we have Caerphilly County Borough Council departments, so not just one department. So the policy are on there, we coordinate it, but it includes other areas like so countryside and landscape. Obviously, have a keen interest in it. Housing, as one of our big landholders, they're involved, and a couple of other departments, planning. So relevant council departments, but then also Natural Resources Wales, as you can imagine, big landholders and a lot of expertise in this area. Garvo are keenly interested for their role in volunteering, and also some of the projects they're involved in, and some of the partners. Groundwork again, and Keep Wales Tidy, for obvious reasons, they're all involved in this area. So the partnership really brings those different organisations together with different expertise, landholding and interest in this area. So the why, hopefully we don't need to explain too much why we think tree planting is a good idea and things, but the main two reasons are around the climate emergency and the nature emergency, which we're all fairly familiar with. Obviously, climate change is happening. We need to address it through reducing emissions, and also nature emergency, which is around our declining biodiversity. And the image on the right is actually the guide, the Welsh Public Sector Zero Carbon Reporting Guide. Every public sector organisation in Wales has a requirement to become carbon neutral. Carbon neutral by 2030, and they say that's as a requirement on us as an organisation. And we all know that the key element of decarbonisation is actually reducing your emissions, so cutting out what the carbon emissions we produce. But obviously, as an organisation which delivers services, there will ultimately be carbon emitted. So we need to balance that to become zero by offsetting, and offsetting the keyest element of offsetting is either tree planting or woodland management, woodland habitat and habitat management. So we do it for those reasons in order to become carbon neutral, and obviously biodiversity. So if we are planting, we make sure we're planting local provenance native species to aid biodiversity and create other green spaces. And then there are obviously other benefits as well to this. So engagement, a way of engaging with people to do this through volunteering, raising awareness, and the publicity goes with it, and a chance to volunteer. So whole range of reasons and good reasons and things to make this work. So as I say, the group has been running for around 6 months now. Initially started off with research around what's the good practice in this area, what the opportunities, what are other people doing, what are the drivers and why, how do we respond to those. The first part, which we are still currently involved in, is the mapping process, so identifying potential sites. That's one of the reasons department like housing are involved. So they're undertaking an exercise to look at all the land holding they have. Obviously, they hold lots of land which might potentially be built on, but some that won't be built on. So could any of that land be released to plant trees on and have a beneficial use? So we do that mapping exercise with ourselves and with the partners involved to spot where we can plant trees. Doing some research and investigation into the cost of this. So obviously, you buy the trees or you might get the trees donated, but then there's fencing, maintenance, management, and all sorts of costs going with it. So getting a good understanding of the cost of this and how it will work and how we can make it work. And then grants and funding is out there. So there are now quite a few grants out there for either individuals or groups to buy trees or get donated trees, which we're looking into. And there is various funding, including some budgets within the council, which we can look at to aid this as part of our decarbonisation and other budgets. Looking closely into tree supplies. People may not be aware, but actually there is a shortage at the moment of good locally grown, local provenance native tree species. So how do we get around that? And I'll touch on that in a minute. We're thinking potential tree nurseries as a way around that. And then maintenance and management. It's all very well finding the money to plant these trees, but they need to be managed on a long-term basis. So we need to put plans in place for how we do that. So all these things are being investigated to make sure the programme will work properly. So the ongoing work, what we're currently doing. So this actually is Tree Week this week, National Tree Week this week. So there's school planting going on. I think it's 5 schools which are currently planting trees this week, and potentially others joining as well. And as a part of this work, part of our initial mapping and the work of the group, we've identified at least 3 areas where potentially we could do some tree planting this planting season. So the planting season, basically the best planting season is when trees are dormant, so November through to February, March next year. So we're hoping to get trees planted in at least 1 or 2 pilot sites and to get them up and running this year. So some of the key ones are Innis Howell Farm, which if people don't know is a council-owned farm. It's the only farm the council own down at by Cynfelyn. So that's a farm down there, and I'll come on to that in a minute. Looking at our country parks through Countryside and Landscape. So Park Cumdarren is a potential site for some planting, and obviously Cwmcarn, the Forest Drive, where all the trees are being felled either through disease, the larch phytophthora, or because they're being destroyed by the fire. There's big areas that need to be planted down there, which we'll be looking at to make sure they're planted, and how can we tie that into this programme. And then of course we are looking at areas of land, say housing, looking at, and other land not necessarily owned by ourselves but by partner organisations. So it could be the voluntary sector, could be the health board, other partners. Would like to become part of this programme, have trees planted on the land so they can offset as well. And then we're also planning a planting event in March. Our aim would be that we identify one site, and then we have a big planting campaign in March to engage with, and I will talk a bit about that in a second, which is this one here. So this is Innis Howell Farm. So I say this is the council-owned farm down in Cynfelyn, between Cynfelyn and Innisfree on the other side of the valley. The farm is about 130 acres. We probably won't be planting all of it, but certainly there's quite a big percentage that could be planted for trees as carbon offsetting. So potentially what we're planning is an event in March where people can get involved. I think given the size of the amount of tree planting, it's quite a bit we've done through contractors, so there'll be a contract in place to do that. But we're certainly looking at identifying different areas within that where we can have volunteers and other groups to plant as well. So I say we're hopefully before Christmas we'll identify which week it will be, because there's a few things to consider around the timing. But probably what we're thinking at the moment is we'll have a week of planting, so it could be a day for schools come along and plant, maybe a day for volunteers and a day for local residents, and identify different areas where they can plant and contribute, and obviously be trained and explain the benefits of this, and it'll be part of the publicity and promotion of the campaign as well. So I say the group hasn't been working that long, but I think we're making good progress. We should get quite a few trees planted this tree planting season. But the chance for you guys and everybody else to get involved who wants to get involved, either in the tree planting event, potentially through identifying other planting areas that could be planted that you might be aware of that you'd be happy to have planted up, and ongoing volunteer involvement. So I talked before about the lack of sufficient locally grown native tree species. We are thinking about developing a tree nursery, which would actually start to address some of that, so growing our own trees. But that offers all the opportunities of training and understanding and volunteers and people involved to engage in that process as well. So it could be that if you've got expertise or would like to learn how to do that, we can sort of get you tied into a potential tree planting nursery project to learn and understand to do that. And then obviously as we go on, as trees develop, there will be maintenance and management issues of the trees we plant, but also potentially of other woodland areas to make sure that we look after our woodland areas to make sure they are managed sustainably and they capture and store as much carbon as we can manage to do through this process. So I think that was it. In fact, it is. That's my last slide. So yeah, there you go, Chair.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think we've got a question from Alison Palmer, please.
Hi, Paul. That sounds really interesting. Sorry, I missed the last meeting. I'm interested in the tree planting nurseries. Is this something that we could potentially get our allotment holders and our allotment societies involved in? I mean, there are obvious places that are very community minded, like Tarragon and Libinus Lifestyles, but there are also other allotment groups that we work with on a fairly regular basis that could probably have a space in a corner somewhere to start bringing on trees, and it might be something that they'd be keen to be involved in. Yeah,
Brilliant idea. It's great because they have the expertise, they have the knowledge, they have the areas available, so that'd be a great idea. We did meet on site at Nishowl. I know you couldn't make that meeting, but we are probably going to set up a little subgroup which will actually probably there'll be two groups. So one group looking at the contractors and making sure the contracts are in place properly and that element, but another one looks at the volunteering and how we can maximise the benefits of volunteers and learning and education with that. So certainly welcome your involvement and thoughts on that. But yeah, planting with allotments would be great. It could be that schools do it, or even individuals grow 2 or 3 acorns and bring them along and plant themselves. So I think the opportunities for involvement and spreading the word and making the success are hopefully endless, and we just need to make sure we maximise as many as we can.
Thank you very much. Judith, you have a query?
Yeah. How long does it take between planting the acorn and then the tree being big enough to be able to be planted as part of a planting scheme? Because the danger is that with carbon offsetting, people fondly imagine that that's all there is to it. You plant a tree and then you can produce as much CO2 as you like. Well, it's going to take a long time for these trees to actually absorb any considerable amount of carbon. So can you give us an idea of timescale?
Oak is a slightly difficult one. It's quite a slow growing one. I suppose the first point of that, I would definitely agree with you that just by people thinking they plant a tree or a thing, that doesn't mean to say they can then just go and emit whatever carbon dioxide without any conscience. It's reducing carbon emissions is the key thing, and tree planting, we should do that as well. But so I suppose if you plant an acorn, if you gather one this autumn and put it into a little pot in your windowsill or in the greenhouse, it's probably be 2 years before you'd be able to put out into the open really, to make it a decent size. In terms of capturing carbon, even in the first year, it'd be capturing a little bit of carbon because it's growing. But you're right, it needs to be probably 5-10 years before it's taking in significant amounts of carbon and storing them. And that's one of the main reasons we need to make sure we manage existing woodland to make sure that we maximise the habitats we already have. And to but plant the trees as soon as we can. The quicker we plant them, the sooner they're capturing the carbon.
Thank you very much. Paul, that's been very enlightening this morning. Alison, did you have any further query?
Yeah, I was just getting a bit nerdy actually. You know, in terms of the tree planting and stuff like that, are you looking at sort of faster growing varieties like willow and hazel and stuff like that? And do you actually get the same sort of carbon capture from some of the faster growing varieties as you do from some of the more traditional sort of long standing ones?
So we'll plant a variety. I think one of the key sort of sayings to the group is the right tree in the right place. So obviously an oak tree wouldn't be suitable for everywhere, and similarly willow wouldn't be the same for everywhere. And it is a balance. I suppose one of the issues around willow, depending on what if you planted willow and used the willow, say for basket weaving or something like that, the carbon is captured. But if you plant the willow, cut it and then burn it, then you're releasing the carbon. So that's not quite the same. So it'll be, there are different species for different places, and some will capture carbon. The quicker they grow, basically, the quicker they would capture carbon. But willow growing quickly and then being released through burning isn't storing the carbon. So it's kind of a roundabout way of answering. But yeah, different. The right tree in the right place for the right application is probably the answer.
Thank you both. Yeah, the Ennis Howell Farm, do you know, I'd forgotten about that place. It is such of educational value. It's lovely, lovely. Thank you very much, Paul, for that presentation.
Welcome.
I'd like to welcome Dr. Llewellyn joining the meeting from the Aneurin Bevan. Thank you for your attendance. And we're moving on now to item 6, which is the small grants to voluntary sector. And this is a verbal update. Please, from Alison.
Hi, Liz. Yes, thank you very much. It's for me to start it off, but really just to put it in context. Some members will remember that back in December 19, we had consideration. We raised some issues around the small grants to the voluntary sector, and about the fact that there was substantial amount of money still sitting within the scheme, and we wanted to promote it and ensure that it was maximised for the benefit of the smaller third sector organisations, the grassroots groups that are entitled to apply for it. As a result of the conversations that we had at that meeting, it was agreed that it would be considered by that grants panel. And after quite some time, needless to say, because we've had a pandemic in the middle, but we had the responses from that grants panel, and it was discussed at our most recent voluntary sector representatives meeting, where there was some concern raised that having had responses from that panel, that there were still things that could be done to smooth the flow of the funding and to ensure that third sector organisations are aware of the scheme, that it's easy for them to apply into, and that they can access the money that is available to them, so that it's not, it goes to where it should go. So really that was for me to sort of set the scene and throw it open to our voluntary sector representatives to continue the conversation and explain some of the concerns that we had.
Thank you, Alison. Any member wishing to contribute to this discussion? Thank you. Roger Evans, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, since the report was originally produced and submitted, as Alison said, we've been hit by the pandemic, and what we are finding coming out of the worst of lockdown is quite a number of small voluntary groups have folded for a variety of reasons. Those that have survived and are struggling to restart are just the sort of groups that could benefit from this fund. And I really want to plead with members, some on this committee I know are also on the voluntary sector panel, but there are many other members of that panel who aren't on this committee, and I would ask members to plead with their colleagues to take serious note of the report we submitted 2 years ago. Firstly, to improve the publicity for the scheme, and what we in Gavo were trying to get across was not publicity about the good things that the voluntary sector had done, but just the fact that this scheme is there and available for them to use. So that's the first point. The second point was to make the scheme easier to access, and it's very disappointing that the authority doesn't make the application form available online. This is in stark contrast to the other authorities in the Greater Gwent area. If you look at their websites, their grant schemes for all sorts of things, the forms are there, and I would challenge officers in Caerphilly as to, if other councils can do it, why can't Caerphilly, quite honestly? And again, as part of the application process, we did ask the authority to review the form to make it easier to fill in, to simplify it in all sorts of ways, which would make that fund far more accessible. And also, 2 years on, I think the authority really needs to review the amounts that are being dispersed. As we pointed out 2 years ago, and as Alison has repeated today, the fund is still greatly underspent, and the proposed 10% increase in awards that the panel agreed will take something like 70 or 80 years to actually disperse that fund. By increasing the amounts available at this time, it would be a big help to kickstart those organisations as they're coming out of lockdown. So for all of those reasons, we would ask members to take on board our comments. And as ever, I think we on the voluntary side are very ready to help in whatever way we can with ways in which this could be achieved. So thank you for listening to our comments, and hopefully members, please take it forward. It's your communities that are going to benefit from this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger, for highlighting those points. And can I call on Councillor Goff, please?
Thanks, Chair. If I can, just to pick up on a couple of things that Roger said, going back pre-pandemic, the Grants to the Voluntary Sector Committee did agree to increase the size of the grants for a period of time to get money out the door, and that was very successful. It took a while to implement because of bureaucracy and going through the system. However, it was agreed at the time that the panel had the flexibility to do that again. So that's one of the things. The form itself, and I felt some of the application myself, to me, is not that complicated. But whether it's the fact that I've done it and I'm proficient with some of the grants, I don't know. And I don't see any reason at all, personally, from my point of view, why the grant application form can't be made available on the internet. And I find it strange because I've spoken to Gina, and I can't remember whether I've spoken to Alison, but Gavo officers were actively promoting grants at one time. but they didn't have access to these forms. They had to speak to the organisation they were working with for them to apply for the form and to fill in, which I find is a bit strange, really. But if Roger, if either yourself or Alison can email me specifics, I'm vice chair of the grants of the voluntary sector panel, asking me, one, if for the next agenda now, I'm not sure whether it's January or March, we can discuss releasing the application forms on the internet. And like I say, I'm happy to champion that cause. You like to see it the way it should be, and to currently review the amount of grant money. Then I'll try and get those agendaed for the next meeting. If you've got anything else to burnish, I don't want to take up everything. Obviously, if there's more issues beyond that you believe require urgent attention, I can try and deal with it. But on those, I don't see any problems with one. They've got the flexibility already to increase the level of grant, because they actually changed as well. Where I think we agreed that where organisations have trouble raising the money to do it, we made the payment method easier as well. So that was agreed that if it needed to be done again, it could be done. So if somebody wants to send me an email along those lines, then I'll send it to the committee section and the chair to see that it's agenda for the next meeting.
Could I come back on that, Rob?
Yes. Yes,
I'm not sure if you're confusing the small grant scheme with the Welsh Church Fund scheme. That was certainly that was certainly raised a few years ago. The small grant scheme has been stuck at roughly £100 per organisation for some time now. And the only change that your panel agreed to was to increase it by 10% and review annually.
The Welsh Churches Fund were the ones that we changed the thing on. The other thing is that coming to the next committee, it's the first time ever, because part of this funding gives concessionary rate relief. And for the first time ever, not the last meeting, but certainly the one before it, the request for concessionary rate relief would have wiped out the fund. So we've asked for that to come back to the next committee. But the implications of doing that, if we made a decision, because I've asked about this previously, to change the format for giving concessionary rate relief, because my own personal view is there are organisations out there that are more in need of that funding than some of the people applying for concessionary rate relief. But if we took that decision, you've got to give 12 months notice to implement it. So there are implications on it. But like I say, if you word the question for me and send me the email, then that and the releasing of the application form, because to me, I don't see, like I say, the format of the form is difficult. I think it's easy and it's only a couple of pages. I think it should be made accessible to both Garvo officers and on the internet. And I've always championed that, and I don't see why it isn't. But I will see that it's agended for the next meeting and discussed.
Thanks for that. I think it's fair to say Garvo members accepted a revised draft of the form to simplify it, and I'm sure Alison would be able to forward you that. And see how much easier it is, Rob. You're an experienced form filler. Lots of these voluntary organisations aren't. So we'll see what you make of the new form. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I'll have a chat with Alison outside of the meeting.
That's great. Thank you. We've Judith, I think, next. Or yes, Judith Pritchard, please.
Got to unmute. Yeah, you got me worried now about the discretionary rate relief, because there was a time when you had to fill your form in every year, and it was very difficult if you didn't or had a change of committee or something. But now it seems to be automatic. Could Rob tell us whether that's going to change? I mean, isn't it going to be automatic in the future? And are people who run halls, will they have to apply every year?
currently, Judith, the way I see it and what I see in meetings and agendas, we are informed of applications for rate relief, and they're granted. It's concessionary, but it's granted. What bothers me and other people on the committee in the last meeting asked a question. I got to be careful what I say here at the moment, because it's about individual groups. But there are people or organizations that are receiving that benefit and they don't need it. And there are other organizations who are in dire need of that help and the money's not going to get to them. I'll leave it at that. And when I speak to Alison, I'll explain a bit more to Alison.
So, sorry, are you just talking about new applications then?
No, I'm talking about all applications, and some of those applications have been there since, you know, 2000, longer perhaps, I don't know.
Thank you both. May I call in Stephen Tiley, please, Gavel?
Yes, thanks very much. Yeah, I just wanted to come in with a suggestion really on this, because I think it's been one of these conversations that's been going on now for quite a while, and I think that I completely and utterly see from a local authority point of view that there's governance that ties into the grants, that it's got to be spent a specific way, and that the panel's got to spend it in the right way. But there's obviously some issues in regards to the third sector being able to access this grant. That's quite clear. So I'm just wondering whether we can just come to some sort of agreement that we can get together with the local authority, so we can understand a little bit about the governance, but also as well for the local authority really see some of the issues that the third sector are going through, and kind of come to some sort of arrangement that we cover every base, and that it's made easier for the sector to actually to get that money, because ultimately it's money that's there for the communities is being missed out for whatever reason. So this is for the benefit of everyone, because I just think if we sit down and amicably just come up with a way of taking this forward, then it can actually resolve a lot of the problems. But for some reason we're not doing that. So I'm just wondering whether it's possible we can actually set something up and actually just, you know, get it dealt with.
Sorry, Chair, if I can come in. If that request is forwarded to me, then I will see that he gets to the relevant people and ask him if they can set that up.
Okay, because I think this is about process as well. So I mean, if we can look at that
I don't
process,
see being,
then
sorry,
that's fine.
Steve, I don't see being a big group.
Oh no,
you know,
no, that's right.
A small group just to look at it.
Yes,
then I haven't got a problem with that, because it might make things easier from both sides then.
100%, and I think we can get that set up. You're right, it doesn't need to be a big group, otherwise it'll start to really muddy the water. But if we've got some third sector representatives who are really struggling with this ourselves as well, we can see us get linked into that. And
but the other side, sorry, Steve, of the coin, is the panel only meets when there's sufficient grant applications to deal with. Where if some of the things raised in that discussion needs dealing with perhaps more urgently, perhaps a special meeting could be set up to deal with just,
I think,
the administration of the grant systems, as opposed to, you know, deliberating on the grants.
Because ultimately, if there was the special meeting that was set up, then obviously that could actually mean that the grant panel would have to get together more often, because there'd be more bids. So I do definitely think there needs to be that special meeting on this occasion to get that sorted.
Yeah, but if that's incorporated in those questions coming forward to me as a suggestion, and I'll forward that to the relevant people and ask them to try and implement it then.
Okay, so can we pick that up as maybe an action then for the next meeting at least, and to see so we can give a bit of feedback on that?
Sooner, then I'll try and get it in and done, so you've got some kind of answer for the next meeting. That's what I'd rather do.
Yeah, agree. That'd be good.
Because like I say, this thing, like I say, it could be March or next meeting.
Yeah.
And to me, you know, I don't believe it. You can't change history.
No.
But we can,
but we can definitely learn from it, can't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been an interesting discussion, and obviously the minutes will be there to record what has been said. I can see no other hands up for this item, so we're going to move on to item 7, which is the Public Services Board Wellbeing Assessment and Plan, which is a verbal update from our Mr. Paul Cook. Thank you, Paul.
No problem. I'll take my Sustainable Development hat off and put my Public Services Board hat on now. So, yes, so just a very quick update. So as we all know, we moved to a Gwent Public Services Board earlier this year. and actually the new Gwent Public Services Board meets, I think, on the 7th of December. So next week, I think that's the second, maybe their third meeting. But the main element of that meeting will be to look at the wellbeing assessment, the draft consultation. So I know quite a lot of you have been involved in the consultation and attended the consultation event, so thank you for that. But that's part of the ongoing process. So the wellbeing assessment needs to be finished by May. So this is just an initial start, which is looking at the data that's been gathered and the input and the data and the sort of the consultation bits. So this will be put together. That'll go out for consultation now, and that actually goes to the Welsh Government and to the Office of Future Generations Commissioner as part of the initial consultation. And then when that is being done, move on to the next stage, which is called the response analysis. This stage is called the situational analysis. The next stage is the response analysis, whereby we look at the so what. So we have the data. So what does this tell us? What are the emerging priorities? What are the issues which are presented and finalised in the wellbeing assessment for May? And then that all then forms the basis for we decide on the priorities to write the wellbeing plan with its objectives, which then have a further year or so to May 2023. So I'm not sure I necessarily explained that very well, but it's the ongoing process, and we'll get the chance to comment on the assessment as it develops and as the priorities emerge before May, and then again on the wellbeing plan as it develops as well. And I suppose what I should also say is, as part of the wellbeing assessment at this stage, as well as the assessment for Gwent, we're producing assessments for each of our 5 community plan areas. So the legislation says that we need to look at it says local authority area, but it's a Gwent-wide area we're doing now, but also then on local areas. So we're doing our 5 local plan areas, so Upper Umney Valley, Mid Valleys East, Mid Valleys West, Lower Isloin and Caerphilly Basin. So that's where we had, I can remember, all 5, doing well now. So we've met in each of those areas to discuss those. There will be a smaller assessment for each of those individual areas, which may well be more applicable, more interesting to some of us to look at that in detail. So those will inform it, and some of those priorities can then make it way into the overall wellbeing plan. And I suppose the other thing to remember about all this is the new wellbeing plan won't start until May 2023. So the existing plan we have, the Caerphilly we want, that's still running, and so we still need to deliver on those priorities. So I know this committee had some concerns around how local issues were dealt with, and we discussed those, but there's still a local delivery group which is meeting on a quarterly basis and reporting and working on the local priorities. So the tree planting project, which I presented on earlier on, for example, is delivering on the enhancing the local and latter environment element for our existing wellbeing plan. So that is still ongoing, and that will go on at least until the new plan comes in. But the ask would be to make sure you get involved in the consultations have already, and make sure that these priorities, which are for Caerphilly, are highlighted in the wellbeing assessment when it's complete in May, and then also the more weight they have, the more support they have, the more chance they've got of being in the Gwent wellbeing plan, which will be sort of available from say May 2023. So that's probably what I was going to say, Chair, but I'm happy to take questions on it because I'm not sure I explained it necessarily as well as I could have done. But
thank you, Paul. Where do we access the consultation? Is that on the web or?
Yeah. So what's that? So the draft that's been produced goes to the Public Services Board on the 7th of December. Once they're happy with that to be put out for consultation, it'll be on their website, but we'll put it out to the usual channels, so you'll hopefully be able to see it in lots of ways. And what I can do is actually get a link sent to it to this panel if you wanted, this committee, because it's a big document. The wellbeing assessment for Caerphilly, when we did it 3 or 4 years ago, was 200 pages. I think this is 320 odd pages at the moment. So it's lots and lots of really interesting and useful data. So it's going to be lodged on the Public Services Board website, and I'll probably just send you a link so you can go in and see it. And it is structured along the chapters of social, economic, environmental, and culture. So you can read it all. More than welcome. It's a very interesting read. But if there are specific areas you're interested in, there are specific chapters you can just focus in on your sort of particular areas of interest. but I can get the link sent out when they're released after the PSB meeting.
Thank you, that's really helpful. May I call on Stephen Tiley, please, from Gavel?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, it wasn't a question I had for Paul. It was just from a third sector point of view. I just wanted to give a bit of an update as well. In the initial Gwent PSB meeting, a lot of the discussion was around the terms of reference. It was obviously the first meeting, the terms of reference of the Gwent PSB, as Paul said, about those terms of reference as well for the local delivery groups to sit underneath that Gwent PSB as well. But I think one of the points that we need to probably think about now as Gabo and working with the third sector is that we're looking to try and implement the third sector partnership agreement. Now, Caerphilly is one of the areas where we've got quite a robust third sector partnership agreement in place that was signed up by all partners going back a number of years ago. So from a Gwent point of view, we'll probably need the same to sort of ensure that we are fully integrated into that setup as well. So at the meeting, I suggested that Gavel would take a lead on that, covering 4 of the areas, with Torfaen Voluntary Alliance covering the 1. I will be liaising obviously with Torfaen Voluntary Alliance in regards to ensuring that their voice is heard as well. But I think the next steps for us now is to write that third sector partnership agreement, bring it to the sector so you can have a look at it, give any input into that. We'll obviously then go to partners as well to get that sign off then effectively. And then what we'll need to sit underneath that partnership agreement then would be the structures that are going to actually work for those local areas. So Caerphilly being one of them, we've got our structures underneath. So it's actually having a look at those and seeing how we can sort of improve those, or when there's any need for change, but it'll all be tied into that sort of Gwent partnership working. So it's just to give a little bit of an update really on some of the steps that we need to take. And in my head, I'm probably thinking that we've had our first meeting now in October. The second one is next week. As Paul said, the wellbeing assessment and the change is going to happen in 2023. So it's probably going to be, in order to get it through the Gwent PSB, it's probably going to be early next year. They'll have to start having a quite a significant draft to get some information back and get some feedback on. So just to give update to the sector, really. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Paul, did you want to come back?
No, I'm happy with that. It's useful for the panel to know, but yeah.
Great stuff. Right, thank you very much. There are no other hands up. So we're looking now at coming to the end of the meeting almost. Items of interest concerning voluntary sector from Compact Partners. Alison, may I call you in, please?
Hi, I'm not sure whether any of our partners have any interest, but what I would like to say is that Michelle Jones, who has been the voluntary sector representative chair for a number of years, stepped down at our last meeting. She's retiring from the parent network and has retired as chair from the voluntary sector representatives subcommittee. And just to let everyone know that we have appointed Lowry Jones from Mentor Iaith as our new chair. Unfortunately, she was unavailable to be with us today, and Simon Ellington is now our vice chair. So it was just to put on record our thanks to Michelle for all her work, and I know that the voluntary sector is currently chairing this group, and we were very thankful to Councillor Aldworth for stepping in today because our new chair wasn't available. But it was just to put on record our thanks to Michelle for being with us for that length of time, and happy retirement.
Yes, well said, Alison. And yes, it'll be recorded in a minute. So our thanks and good wishes to Michelle in the future. So there be no other business. I declare this particular meeting closed. And to wish you all the very best for Christmas and a very